Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. It's been a while since I've built out a plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript project on my channel, and I thought this was a fun little game to build out, so that's what we're going to do. We've got some cool things. You can see here we can kind of go around. I also failed to mention that you can actually tab to things as well, and then you can select them with your keyboard if you want to do that. And we might even add some extra special things as we get going. Okay, let's go ahead and get started though. I'm going to create an index.html page. Let's see right here, index.html. Let's also create a style.css. And then finally, I will create an app.js. Okay, so in the index.html page, let's just do a boilerplate HTML document with the emit. And then I'll say Tic Tac Toe game or something like that. Okay, now inside here, we're going to have a few things. So first of all, we're going to have an H1 that says Tic Tac and Toe. And then below here, I'm going to actually do a lot of the work in JavaScript itself. So here I'm just going to have a div with a class of game board. And I'm going to give this an ID of board. And we'll use the ID for JavaScript and the class for CSS. All right, and then finally below here, I'm going to have a paragraph with an ID of info. Let's just leave it at info. Okay, so we've got all those set. Now I need to go ahead and hook up my CSS. So link :CSS will actually give me that style sheet declaration. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and hook up my app.js. So let's do a script.src and then app.js. I guess technically for both of these, we can do it like this just to make sure that it is relative in case you put this in some kind of other project. That's usually good practice. Now, in order for this to load after the entire body, there's a couple things we can do, but just declaring it as a type of module will actually do that for us. So it'll load it afterwards. And on top of that, it will also be a module. Okay, so we should be set to go. Let me go ahead and just click go live. All right, and it should be on 5001. So maybe let's copy this over and change it out to 5001 just so we can see it right here. Okay, there we go. So we should be set to go. Let's go ahead and do just a couple of basic things in the style sheet. So I'll start with just a basic clear. Let's take all the after and the befores and everything else. We'll say here box sizing of border box. And I'll also go ahead and just set the margin and padding both to 0 as well. And then on the body of the document, let's go ahead and change the font family. And here I'll just do system UI and sans serif as the fallback. All right, there we go. So you can see that updates for us. We'll get back around here to the rest of this, but for now, maybe let's just do something real basic here. So I'll say display grid, place items center, and then I will do min height of 100 view height. Okay, so that should put things in the middle, and to actually make sure everything stays in the center of the screen too, I need to actually center the content as well. So place content center as well. All right, there we go. So right now, this is the only thing that's really got any content, so that's why it's down here in the middle, but eventually the game board will be right here as well. So we'll probably have to get back to that, but for now, let's jump over to the app.js and start to template this out. Now up here, we're going to have several selectors, so let's go ahead and just start with those so we know we've got the game board. So const, let's call this game board, and this will be document.querySelector, and I'm just going to select the ID of board. Next, I want to be able to update that little info paragraph, so let's copy this down. I'm going to grab the first one, and let's go ahead and change this to info. I think that'll be fine, and here this will be info as well. Okay, next, let's go ahead and create the game board, and we'll do this with a function that we just called create game board. And the very first thing I need to do is to insert a bunch of empty tiles inside of the game board itself. Now, we can do this in a bunch of different ways, but I'm going to go ahead and declare a variable called empty tiles. And this is going to start with an empty string. So a string with a space in it. And then you can repeat strings with the repeat method. So I'm just going to repeat this 9 times. So we'll have 9 strings that are repeated that are all empty. And then we can split it on that space. So basically what this will do is give us an array of split strings. So if I come over here and let's run this just to make sure I'm getting what I think I'm getting. And I'll come down here and create game board. So actually run it. If I jump over this way and open up the console, there we go. So I got an array of 9 empty strings. Perfect. Okay, so for each of these, now what I want to do is loop over these and insert them into that game board itself. Now there's several ways you can do this, but since I know exactly what's here, I'm just going to insert it as HTML, and that way we can quickly restart the game too by just swapping out all the HTML in these in the game board itself. So let's call this something like tile grid. Now I'll grab my empty tiles and I'll map over them. For each item, which I'll just call T, I want to return a template string. And this will be a button, so that way I can tab to it really easily. And we'll just give this a class of tile. And I'll go ahead and close this out like this. So now essentially I've just got an array of strings that all say button class tile in these that kind of fill these spots for these 9 tiles. Now you could compress this more, do it all in one line, but I just wanted to make that really clear, so I split it out into 2. Now let's take the game board and we'll set the inner HTML to my tile grid. So if I go ahead and save this, now I should have 10 or 9 buttons here, and you can see that they show up really small. We'll have to style that obviously so you can actually click things, but at least it's set. The other thing I want to do is have some kind of turn that we keep track of throughout. So we're going to declare this as a global variable up top. And again, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but I think this hopefully will help make sense. So we're going to basically just switch this between the X's and the O's as you play the game. To start with though, every time I start the game, I want to set the turn to a capital X like that. And then next, I want to set the info text content, so the text of that paragraph with the ID of info. We're going to set this again to a template string. This will be the turns. So if that's X's or O's, it'll be that turn's turn. All right, so if I save that, you should see X's turns, or it would be O's turns if I switch this out to O's. Okay, so we've done enough now that we actually need to style it just so we can kind of get the basics up and running. So let's come over here. So first of all, let's take the H1 and we'll increase the font size here to a little bit more, something like 3 rem. Then I'm going to grab the paragraph, which there's only that 1 on the page, and we'll set this to 1.5 rem, and a font weight here of bold. Now I want to make this a little pill shape, but that gets into colors, and we're going to add those in a second. So perhaps the next thing to do would be to set some basic colors on everything. And the way I typically like to do this is declare a root here, and that way I've got one kind of area that controls all of my colors. So what we're going to do is use HSL. So we've got a hue, saturation, and value that we can declare for every single color. And when we update the hue, it will actually update the hue for the entire site. And that way, as it changes turns, you can see if it's blue or red's turn. So I'm going to do that by writing a variable here called hue, and I'm going to set this to 10, which will be kind of a reddish color. And then I'm going to have a couple things. So I'll have background here. First of all, we'll set this to a var of hue. So I'm going to grab that hue and drag it in there. We'll set it to 40% on the saturation, and then we'll set it to 98% on the lightness. Now this isn't yet HSL. It has to actually be wrapped in HSL, but I'm not going to do that here, and I'll explain why in a second. The other thing I want to do is set the text value. Again, it's going to use hue. Here though, I'm going to increase the saturation quite a bit to 80, and then finally back off the lightness to something like 20. I've got one final one then to declare, which is the accent color. Here again, hue, that should be just fine. I do want to back this off a touch though to 60. And then finally, I'll set this to 50% on the lightness. Now, this hue variable then controls everything else. What I'm going to do is come down here on the body and declare a background color. And I need to actually write HSL and wrap my variable in that. And in this case, I'm going to set it to my background color. If I save it, you should see it takes on a slightly different hue. It's kind of a little hard to see. So let me actually switch to accent just so it's really clear. So it's this red color. If I were to change this to anything else, so like 120 or something, I think is green, 220-ish is blue, 240 is purplish. So as you kind of just change that hue variable, it updates all of these as you go. Now, why have I not wrapped it in HSL up here? Why am I making myself do this everywhere down here? Well, what I can do is anytime I want to, I can set some opacity on this. Just with a /, and you can see here it's 0.4, that's 40% opacity. Now note that I do not have commas here. That's because I'm using an updated syntax for these that allows me to just do it like this. You can also do it with commas, and then I think this would be a comma as well as how that works, but just pay attention to those little details or it'll mess it up for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and back this out of here. Actually, I'm just going to backspace a bunch. All right, there we go, all the way back to background. Let's copy this down, and now what I want to do is update the text to be my text variable like that. And then finally, I want to add a little bit of spacing between all of these. So let's add a gap of 2 rem everywhere. And let's also add padding of 2 rem all the way around. And I'll move this down here. Okay, so now I've got a gap between all these things and then padding all the way around the entire document, which you can't really see right now, but on smaller screen sizes, it'll give a little bit of breathing room on the edges of the screen. All right, next down this way, this paragraph right here, we want to be in a little pill shape, and we want the background color to be my accent color. So I'm going to come down here and set a background color property. And here I want it to be wrapped in HSL, and I want this to be accent. Now that's just a little shortcut I have to where if I type comma HSL, it will wrap it and put my cursor right there. The other thing I want though is the color itself to be my background. So whatever the same as the background is, and then let's add some padding. I'll do something like 0.5 rem and 1.5 rem. Finally, the best way to get a border radius that's always going to be as curved as possible is to use 100% V max. So take either the height or the width, whatever is bigger, and make that the border radius. So it'll always be a perfect circle if it's square, or if the aspect ratio is off like this, it will be a pill shape. Okay, next let's work on the game board itself. So remember that had a class of game board, whereas we use the ID of board to access it in JavaScript. Here I want this to be display grid and grid template columns, right like this. And here let's just repeat. So we've got 3 columns and they're all the same amount, 1 fraction. You'll notice we're getting some commas here. That's because of the way we did the JavaScript. I wanted to show you that, but it had to be big enough, first of all, for you to actually see what was going on. So let's get this figured out, and then I'll go back to the JavaScript. So next I want my gap. This will be 0.5 rem. And then let's go ahead and set a width on here of 600 pixels. Now, it's important then next that I add a max width, and this is the maximum it's allowed, so it will actually cut it short of that 600 if needed. And this will just be 90% view width. All right, like that. So it won't ever quite go the full width. And then we also have the 2 rem padding all around. Now, just to make sure this is always a square, I'm going to set this to 1/1 for aspect ratio. And you can see that kind of squares everything up. Now we can actually see the problem here, which is we've got these little commas, and they're actually taking up game board spaces. Why am I getting these commas? Well, for that, let's go back to the app.js. You'll notice here that we're mapping over something, and a map is always going to give you an array back. And then I'm just dumping that array directly into here. So what I actually need to do is at the end of this, I need to join it, and I need to join it on nothing. That essentially turns it into one long string of HTML without kind of the intervening comma that would be normal in an array. All right, perfect. Let's go back to the style sheet. So let me jump back up here, and now let's work on those tiles. They did just have that class of tile, and here we're going to have a border, 2 pixels, solid, and then I'm going to use my text variable here. Let's now move the background color here. We're going to strip all this out and just change this to background. All right, next let's set a border radius on here. We'll just do 0.5 rem. And then these are buttons, and even though you think that they would have cursor pointers by default, buttons do not, but I actually want it to be clickable like that, so we're going to leave it just like that. Now next, actually I'm going to declare all these things with before and after pseudo elements, so the X's and the O's, but to make sure that they're always right in the center, I'm going to do display of grid and place items center. This will center anything inside that div once we get around to putting it there. Then I am going to have a font weight of bold, and that way it's as big as possible. And maybe what I should do is come back over here, and for now, I just set like X for all these. All right, that way you can see what we're about to do, which is we're going to declare a font size. So font size here will be clamp, and this clamp property is going to take 3 different things. The smallest you'd ever let it get, which is 2 rem, the ideal, which we're going to calculate off of the view width of the screen, plus 1 rem. All right, so it's going to try to fit that, and then the largest I'll ever let it be is 10 rem. So small screen sizes will be 2. It'll try to be this, and the largest it will ever get is 10. So you can see right here, it's, whatever decent size that is. This gets down to 2 rem. If I were to kill this and make it as large as possible, eventually it's going to cap out at 10 rem. So that seems to be about right, and it makes it fully responsive too. All right, last, these should always be perfect squares, and they should be because of that grid system, but just to make sure, I'm going to set this to aspect ratio 1/1, so it should always lock in at that perfect square. Now there's several other things we want to do here, like changing all the colors and that kind of stuff, but let's return back to functionality and just make sure we can make this thing do what it's supposed to do, and then at the end we'll add a bunch of extra sauce to style this the way we want it. Okay, so right now I'm going to remove these X's and then make it when we click to where it'll actually kind of like respond to that click. So let's come back over to the app.js and remove this right here. And we've created the game board. That's the first step. The next thing I want to do though is attach some event listeners. Now we could do this in a couple different ways. I could attach 9 different event listeners here, or I could just attach 1 for the entire board and basically use that one event listener that when I click inside the entire game board, figure out what I've clicked on. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so let me come in here and we're going to take the game board itself and I'm going to add an event listener. This will be a click. And then you can write this inline, but I'm actually going to declare this elsewhere. So I'm going to say handle game board click. All right, so let's go ahead and come down here and declare that function. So handle game board click, it's going to take in the event that it's passed. So whenever I click anywhere in the game board, it should pass along the event to this right here. So this click event listener will pass it on. And here what I want to do is check if the value exists. So where am I going to store this value? Well, I'm actually going to store it on a data attribute right here, a custom data attribute. So I'm going to check to see if value exists. And this eventually will be on e.target.dataset, and then I want to check the value itself. So the value will be the data.value. Now, if that doesn't make sense, let me come over here and just console log this, jump over this way, and click anywhere, you can see that what I get is value exists undefined. Undefined, undefined, undefined. So how am I going to get this? Well, what I'm eventually going to do is add a data attribute inside of the game board. So inside here, if I were to come in here on any of these buttons and declare data dash, and you can see over here, I'm looking at data dash value and set this to something like X. Now, if I come back over here, all of these will still say undefined, but if I click on this one, it should return X. And you can see it does right there. So I'm going to basically check to see if there's a custom data attribute that says either X or O. If there's anything there at all, it should exist. So it'll give me something. Now, what do I want to do with that information? Well, if there's anything that exists at all, then basically I don't care. I don't want to do anything to this. So the only case I care about is if there is no value that exists. In that case, I want to update the e.target.dataset.value to whatever my current turn is. So if it's X's, it should be X's. So if I come over here, I should be able to click here, and now this should say data value X. If I come over here and I click again, let's see, down, I guess that was down this way, that should be X2 because I haven't switched around that to O's yet. But you can see that's what it's doing. All right, so that's a starting point. The first thing let's do is actually switch it to the other side. So that means I need to take my turn. I need to set this equal to, if turn equals X, then I want to set it to O. Otherwise, I want to set it to X. All right, so let's do this and then I'll walk you through this. So this should be X. Let me move this up here. Yeah, X. Now this should be O. This should be X. This should be O. So what I'm doing is every time I click, I'm adding this if it doesn't exist. If I were to re-click on one of these, you'll see it doesn't do anything because a value exists, so it skips all this right here. But assuming there is no value that exists, as I click, it's going to look and say, what's the current turn? I'm going to set a data attribute called value to that turn. Then what I want to do is take the turn and I want to make it equal to either O, if this is an X, or X if it's an O. All right, so this is just a little ternary, like a little if statement inline here that will set the turn to the opposite. Now, there's a lot more we need to do, but let's first of all come over here and how are we going to handle this in the CSS? Well, what I can do is check on the tile to see if data-value exists and if it's equal to X. So that will tell me if there's a data value that's X or O. I'm going to set the before here, and I want to set the content to X. So let's go ahead and save that, and you can see that all the X's come in. That means I can do the same thing right here, and I can set this to O, and I can set the value to O. So now I've got X's and O's for all those. I can come in here and keep clicking, and you can see that that all populates. So once again, we've got more styling to do, but let's return back to the logic and kind of figure out the logic first, and then we'll come back and style everything. So now that I'm over here, every time I click, the other thing I want to do is update the score. So check to see if basically either team has won. So the first thing I'm going to actually do is copy this and cut it out because we're going to actually check the score and then update the turn afterwards. So let's call it a function we're going to write called check score. And we're just going to run it right after we click a new game piece that hasn't been clicked yet. So here we'll call this check score. Let's go ahead and paste that turn back in. So for now, this shouldn't change anything. Just as I click, it should toggle it either direction. But what I actually want to do is check to see if any winning combination has already been hit. So if we think about it, what are my winning combinations? Well, it's across here, across here, or down, 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 or this way, or this way. Those are the only ones that are possible. So let's go ahead and come back up top here and declare something. We're just going to call this like winning combos or something like that. Now this will be an array of arrays. So inside here, let's think through the possibilities. Remember, this array is going to be 0 indexed. So for all the different tiles, this will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 numbers, 0 through 8. So I know that 0, 1, and 2, this is a winning combination here. I also know if I comment this down, maybe let's just add a little comment here like top row. And I'll move this down. We'll say middle row. And then I'll move this down and say bottom row. So this should be 3, 4, 5. This should be 6, 7, 8. All right, then we've also got the columns here. So this would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 0, 3, 6, right? So let's do the same thing here for these columns. So we'll say left column, 0, 3, and 6. Let's copy this down a couple times, and this will be middle col, and this will be right col. So this would be 1, 4, and 7, and this would be 2, 5, and 8. So we've only got 2 left. This would be my diag left to right. And this is going to be my diag right to left. So left to right, this would be 0 and 4 and 8. So let's update that, 0, 4 and 8. And the other way would be 2 and 4 and 6. So what I'm doing is just taking the number of the index of this array of all these tiles and saying that these are the winning possible combinations. So what am I going to do with that information? Well, let's come back down here, and inside here, we're going to check against these. So let's just add that down here. But the first thing I need to do is actually get the values of every single thing on the game board. So all of the tiles. And I know they're going to be in the DOM because I just clicked one of them, and that's the only time this check score function is run. So now that they're in the DOM, each time I click, I actually want to check their values. So I'm going to first of all grab all the tiles, and I want to grab an array of those tiles. So I'm going to say document.querySelectorAll, and I'll grab anything with the class of tile. Then I want to grab the actual data values on those. So let's call this something like tile values. This will be all my tiles, and I'm going to map over them. And for each tile, I simply want to check the t.dataset.value. So I should get either X or O or undefined if that isn't there. So just to make sure we're getting what we think we are, let me come in here and console log this and open this up. And now anytime I click, I should get an array of all the different items. You'll see I clicked the second to last one, and this is the only one that has value here, and it is X. If I come up here and click, this one should be 0 or O, and then X and O. And as I click these, you see they're filling in these arrays. So now I can check these to see this is the 0, the 1, the 2 index, and I can check that against here and say, hey, are there any winning combinations that are 0, 1, and 2? And if all these were 0, 1, and 2, if these were all O's, then that would be a winning combination. So let's actually check against each of those. So let's declare a variable. We're just going to call it isWinner. And it doesn't matter what the winner is just, is there a winner at all? So all we need to check is against all my winning combinations. So let's bring this up here. Are there any that match this? So we can use the sum method that exists to basically check each individual combo. So I'm going to say for each individual combo, each of those sub-arrays, which we'll just call combos. For each of those, I just want to check if all of their values are the exact same. And just like a map or a filter, it can return some comparison. And this will, in the end, give me either true or false for the entire thing. So I'll walk through this, and then we'll go back through it again once I'm done doing this. Let's go ahead and destructure out of this the first, the second, and the third thing. We'll just call it like, let's just call it A, B, and C. And that way it's clear from the combo. All right, so in other words, each set of arrays here, I'm just going to rename these as A, B, and C, and that way I have a way to reference them quickly. And I'm going to ask if tile values, so this right here, if the thing I'm looping through, at the A index, which in this internal loop is whatever the first thing is in that sub-array. If that exists, so if there actually is a value there, then also check if the tile values A, if that equals the tile values B. So in other words, if this is X, does X equal X or O or undefined? And then we'll do one final check, and I'm going to actually copy this out, and we'll add it like this. And you can see my prettier here is already kind of changing how this looks just to make it a little bit cleaner. So what I'm checking is, first of all, is there actually anything here? If it's undefined, then I can already skip this because I know it's not a winning combo. If it has an X, then I'm checking, hey, does B also have an X? If this is not the same, so this is undefined or O, then it's going to skip it. And it's going to jump to the next iteration. Otherwise, it's going to say, okay, they're both X's. Let's now check the C combination. So in the end, if I come over here, I should get either true or false. So if I come over here, I'm going to click here. This should be false because I don't yet have any winning combination with a single value. This is 0. This is false. Sorry, O, not 0. And then this finally should be true. All right, so now this is a winning combination. Which winning combination? Well, it is this one right here. So 2, 4, and 6. So again, what it's doing is it's looping through all the winning combination possibilities. It's saying, do any of them, just one of them works. This is what that sum method does. Are there any of them at all where their winning combination is all the exact same value, which we're extracting out and checking right here. All right, hopefully that makes sense, and it's a quick way to check against all those different combinations. Now, all I want to check is if there is a winner, then I just want to return, for now, let's just do like an alert, like you won. All right, something like that. If it is a winner, then it'll just return out of this entire check force score function, so it's not going to update this at all. Otherwise, it will update it for us. So let's close this down just so we can see. So X's turn, O's turn, X's turn, O turn. Now I also need to update this right here as well. So just to keep all of our functions clean, let's go ahead and copy this out one more time. We're going to move it one more time to a new function called update turn. And update turn, let's write right up here. So function update turn. And in this case, I'm going to do this. And then I'm also going to take my info.text content. And this will say turn, so like X's or O's, whoever's turn turn it is. All right, so X's turn, O's turn. So now click here, O's turn, X's turn, O's turn, X's turn. Okay. And eventually, if I have a winning combination, it says you won. All right, so that's the basic functionality set and ready to go. Now it's time to kind of have some fun. So the first thing I want to do is add some extra styling. So we actually want to color these things differently depending on if they're X's or O's. We also want to change that for the entire game board itself. So what I'm going to do is set the color on the tile itself. And in this case, I'm just going to set it to my accent color. All right, so like this, it should change it to this accent color. All right, so now they're all X's or all O's, and you can see that they're all this red color. So eventually I want to switch it back and forth, but at least it's taking on that color. So with that said, let's come back over this way. And what I will do is after we've checked to see, I'm going to update the turn already. So in this update turn, I can also change out the color for the entire site. Now you might remember that I declared a root right up here. And in this root is where I set the hue. So the hue is the only thing I need to change. And we can get to that root in a couple different ways, but just document.document element is the same as selecting the HTML. And what I want to do is set on the style, a new property, or update a property. This will be the hue. And I want to set it to either 10, or we'll do like something like 220 or something for the blue color. So let's check if the turn is an X. And if it is, I want that value to be 10. Otherwise, I want it to be 220. So now, as I click, it should actually switch it between the blue and the red, just like that, so everything updates. You'll notice that these are not staying the same, so we actually need to update those as well. Now, this hue variable, even though I just declared it in my CSS right up here, I can actually overwrite it in more precise kind of selections, like down this way. So what I'm going to do is actually, instead of having this accent redeclared, I'm just going to steal this right here and instead declare it like this. That way I can update just the hue locally just for this tile, and it will always stay with that individual tile. So let's come back over here, and I need to grab this exact same thing right here. And let's see, inside this handle game board event, since I'm checking the score and I'm not passing the E, I won't have access to the event or the target or anything like that. So what I need to do is actually come inside here, and I need to grab the e.target.style. And now if I come in here and I click, this should be red and it stays red. This should now be blue and it should stay blue. So I'm actually overwriting it here. And if I were to open this up over this way, you can see that this right here has a locally defined hue variable for the style. So it's saying, hey, stick this to 10 no matter what the rest of the thing is. Even though up here, the style up top for the entire site is now set, the hue is set to 10. Here it's set to 10, but here it's set to 200. So it's just going to stay right there. 200, is that right? Yeah, I think I had a 220 in my original example, but that should work. Okay, so you can see how they actually stay, but everything else switches back and forth. Pretty cool, right? Now, in the original example, I had it over here to where when I hover, it actually previews this with an X. Well, there's a couple different ways we can do that, but what I'm going to do is write a couple other functions. So we'll say something like handle mouse enter, and whenever the mouse enters, I'm going to update or add a variable to it. So we're going to actually do the same check we did right here, because if a value exists, then I don't want to do anything. All right, so only on empty tiles, essentially, do I want to do something. So if there is no value that exists, right here, then I want to do something. And that is I want to declare another data attribute. We'll say e.target.dataset.hover. So this will be the same as saying data-hover in my CSS. Or my HTML, this is going to now be equal to whatever the turn is. So X or O, whatever that happens to be. And then I also want to grab the same thing right here and drop this in here. So you could obviously make this a little more dry if you wanted to, but now I'm actually declaring it here. So we haven't yet attached this to anything, but that's what it will eventually do. So let's now attach this handle mouse of enter. And let's see, let's come back up to the new game board. Now we did go ahead and use event propagation here, so anywhere we click inside this whole thing, it will then it will run this event listener. The hard thing is we can't really do that with hover, and I'll show you why. So if I come in here and I set this to mouse enter, which is the JavaScript version essentially of hover, and I change this to handle mouse enter. Now when I come in here, if I open this up, and so you can see what's going on here, as soon as I enter this, it's going to add a data hover, but notice it adds it to the entire game board. So I actually need to declare this on the individual tiles inside of here. So unfortunately, that means I need to declare here like all tiles once again and grab document. Actually, we could just do game board dot query selector all and select anything with a class of tile. Now that I have that, I can say all tiles dot for each tile. I just want to add an event listener. So add event listener. The event listener here is mouse enter. And what do I want to run but handle mouse enter? Now, if I come in here, you can see as I hover over each of these, they get this data dash hover X, and then they also get this style, which will be eventually overwritten when I click if it happens to be the opposite, but it's fine. We can leave it like that. All right, so let's actually handle this in the CSS so we can see what's going on first. So let's come back over here, and I'm just going to copy one of these down. And here I'm going to say data dash hover, and I'm not going to actually say it has to be equal to anything. If it just has any data dash hover element, then I want to grab whatever that is. Now, we could have also done the same thing here and set the data value to the same thing. So maybe that's the smarter way to do it. So we can just say data value and do the same thing. And that way these can work the same way, because we can actually extract those using a function in CSS called attr. Now, this only works on data attributes with before and after pseudo elements. And I think I would love for them to expand this at some point, but so far as I know, they have not yet. So I'm going to grab here the data value, and that should update it. And I'll do the same thing right here. And we'll set this to data hover. Now, the other thing I want to do is set the opacity on here to like 0.7, something like this. And then up here, I want to set this opacity to 1. Now, I actually need this to be before it so that it properly overwrites it when I actually have a data value in here as well. So if I come back here, you can see that now I'm actually getting this kind of opaque version. If I click, it should overwrite it, and now I actually get this color. Same thing down here. You can see all these O's are going to populate. We need to actually remove them, which we will in a second here. But you can see that if I click, now it becomes more solid. All right, so maybe we actually back this off even more, make it really opaque just so you can really tell. So let's actually write a little bit of logic to now remove that if we need to. So I'm going to grab this, and we'll say handle mouse leave at this point. So leave, and here I don't really care if there's a value that exists or not. I'm just going to say basically for everything, I want to set the e.target.dataset to just an empty string. So in other words, I don't want it to be anything. So now if I come over here, as I hover, it's there. When I pull off, it should disappear once I add this, which I have not yet done. So let's come back up top here and set it right here. So for each of these, let's actually make sure that we can declare multiple things. So I'm going to come inside here and say when mouse enter happens, do that. And when mouse leave happens, then do handle mouse leave. So let's come back over here and test it. When I leave, yeah, there we go. So I click, I can look at all these, and then as I click, they should update. All right, so that should all work properly. That's looking good to me. And we didn't have a winner. That's all right. All right, the next thing we need to do is update what happens when somebody wins, because we don't just want an alert, we actually want it to do something else. So let's come all the way down to my check score and is winner. And here what I'm going to do is return another function. And here what I'm going to do is have it return show congrats. All right, so this will be a function we're going to write. And let's come up top here and we'll say function show congrats. All right, so in here is where we're going to basically decide who's the winner and update all that kind of stuff. So the first thing I'll do is change that text content of the info paragraph here. And this will just be whatever turn it is. So if it's X or O, we will go ahead and win. Now you'll see here we have not updated the turn, so it should be whoever the existing turn was at that point, still at this point. So it should be X or O, depending on who that is. So let's go ahead and save it and just double check that that works. So if I come in here and eventually X wins. Okay, perfect. All right, back over this way. I actually want to update one more thing, because if I come back in here and again, somebody wins, like this O wins, I can actually keep clicking even though the game is done. So I want to remove the event listener I had up here. So let's see, this handle game board click. I want to remove this right here. So let's actually grab this, and instead of adding it, let's remove it. So that should work. So now if I come over here and somebody wins, I shouldn't be able to click anymore, but I'm still getting all these hover states. I can actually still tab to stuff if I want to as well. So I need to update all of that. So probably the easiest way to do that is just to grab the game board itself and set an attribute. And there's an attribute called inert. That's fairly new to JavaScript, but if you add it as true, or really anything, if it's inert at all, then when it's on it, you can't click, you can't hover, you can't tab to it. The whole thing is just basically inaccessible. So now I'm setting it to inert true, so now you can't interact with it. Now we actually want to restart the game as well. So how do we restart it? Well, let's go ahead and write another function we're going to call restart game. And I'm going to set this, I'm going to set timeout and say that after 1 second, I want to call restart game, which we have yet to write. So after 1,000 seconds, it will run this function. So back up here, let's say function restart game. And here, I want to do a couple things. First of all, let's declare a variable for seconds. So we'll say something like after 3 seconds. I'm going to on an interval, and here this takes two things. It takes a callback function, And after this callback function is run, it will run again on a set interval, and in this case of every 1,000 milliseconds or once a second. All right, so what do I want to do in this function? Well, the first thing I want to do is set the info.text content here to restarting. So restarting in, and then here I just want it to be whatever seconds there are. So 1 second, 2 second, 3 second. So this will say like restarting in 1, restarting in 2, restarting in 3. So how do I get it to actually count down? Well, every time it loops through this, I'm going to take my seconds and I'm just going to minus it. So take it down 1. Now it'll keep going infinitely in that direction unless I stop it some way. So what I need to do is actually say if seconds is less than 0, then I want to do 2 things. First of all, I want to clear the interval. So stop doing this. And then I also want to restart the game. Okay, so how do I clear the interval? Well, I first of all need to set this to a variable. So we'll set it to something like timer. That way I can clear it. So I can come down here and say clear interval, and I'll pass this timer. Secondly, I want to restart the game, and I can do that actually just by rerunning this create game board function. So I'm going to come back in here and create the game board all over again. So let's try this out. So if I click, and click, X wins. After a second, it passes it to restart game. Now it says 3, 2, 1, 0, and then it restarts the thing. All right, so there we go. Now let's just do 1 or 2 more quality of life improvements, because if I come back over here, you're going to see that now I can't interact with this at all. And the reason I can't is because I've gone ahead and set everything to inert right here. So I actually need to remove this as well. So let's come back up top here. And even though the first time this won't matter, what I need to do is come in here and remove an attribute called inert. So remove attribute, and that would just be the inert attribute. All right, that way it should be gone when I restart the game. So let's just double check that works. 3, 2, 1, eventually I have to wait for that, and then it should restart, and I should be able to start clicking it again. Yep, there we go. So everything is back as you'd expect. All right, lastly, you can see as I tab through these, I'm getting kind of this blue default ring. Let's go ahead and change that up. And then we might add 1 or 2 extra things for those of you who've stuck around just to make it extra fancy. So here I want to grab the focus state on any of these tiles and just say the border color here, we're going to set this to, let's actually do the same thing we did right here. That way it can be dynamic based on the color of whatever it happens to be, like blue or red, during that individual turn. And then I also want the outline here. I'm going to increase it from the default to 3 pixels, solid, and then the same color. So now if I come over here and tab, you can see I get much more distinct, and it actually stays with that color. And then if I come over here, it should now eventually be blue. And I see it's not picking that up. So there are a couple ways to fix this, but we're probably going to have to decide between, do we want like these hover states to control it like this, where when you hover, you actually see these colors like this, or do we want it to where if you tab to it and hit enter, it actually changes that to blue here? I think I'm going to choose that. So if that doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. But basically, I'm going to set these both to accents like this. And now it should work as you're tabbing through it. But as soon as you click it, it'll actually change to the opposite color. So you can see here, this is blue, and now it'll switch to red, but now the rest of these are red. So I think that's probably the way I'd go, but you can probably switch it up and actually get it to work if you'd like to. All right, finally, I'm going to come in here, and the other thing I want to do is that whenever this has a data value at all, so data value, just like we saw down here, I want to change the cursor. So let's come in here and change the cursor to not allowed. All right, that way if I come in here and I click, now it's not allowed. I know I can't click there anymore. I'm not sure I like that color change. Let's go ahead and copy this. I'm going to switch back because I think a lot of people will be hovering more than they would be tabbing to these things. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to come in here and paste that in. I think that's probably my preferred method. So now it actually, once I focus on it, you get this blue ring. This is red. And then, yeah, it's not the greatest tabbing experience, but I think that's probably better overall. Okay, the last thing I think I want to add, and this is kind of beyond the scope of the project, but let's go ahead and just add some confetti. Why not, right? So I think there's a library called like JS Confetti. I think I did something on the channel a long time ago about this. Is this right? Let's check. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, since we're just using like vanilla HTML, we're just going to add this script tag. Let's just add it down here. Sure, that works. Okay, and then I should be able to just declare like this right here. So let's come, let me make sure that's saved. It's already globally declared on the entire HTML page, so I should be able to come in here and show congrats. How about right inside here? So I should be able to just show confetti. Let's see if this works. So back over here, like this. Oh yeah. Okay, and I think, can't you just do like emoji? Oh yeah, okay. So back inside here, let's go ahead and add this, and we'll say emojis, and let's do an array of these. Let's do like party. All right, let's just double check that worked. Come back over here. We click, and there we go. All right, so restarting in 3, 2, 1. Now we should restart everything all over, and we should be set to go all over again. Let's make sure that the colors work properly when blue wins. So it starts with blue, and it should reset to red at the very beginning, I think. Okay, so it does not. So that's one more thing we need to fix, because now you can see the colors are actually off. So the other thing we can do then is just in this creating game board, make sure that we set our hue for this right here. So after we set the turn, let's just go ahead and set the hue to 10. All right, that way we know it's always 10, or that red color as the X's, and the O's are always going to be blue. So let's make sure that O wins again. All right, so when O wins, it's blue, but when we restart, everything should go back to our red color, and it does. All right, there may be 1 or 2 bugs I didn't see when I was building this out, but hopefully that all makes sense, and that was a fun project to build out together. I really enjoy these kinds of projects because they really help you think through a problem from start to finish, considering all the different possibilities, and then in the end, you have something you can actually use. In fact, I played this with my daughter earlier today, and she thought it was awesome. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed it as much as she did. Well, thanks so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one. Happy coding.